Hey, everybody. I know it's been kind of a long day now. I'm running a little bit late, but we still have some more stuff to talk about. And this is one of the panels that, or discussions that I've been most looking forward to all afternoon. It's a conversation about how bots factor into all of this. When I joined betaworks a couple of months ago, as John and Matt will attest, is that I wouldn't shut up about bots. I was talking about them incessantly and really excited about them. And really excited about this idea about how, as these messaging-based interfaces had become so predominant in the way that we were starting to interact with our devices and, frankly, becoming platforms for everything, whether it was for personal messaging or now with Slack for our professional messaging, that it made sense that bots, messaging-based bots, would become a way that we interacted with information and with each other. And so wanted to do sort of a quick introduction for this panel. When we have Ben from XOXCO, Naveen from Expa, and April from Slack. We're going to have a conversation about this stuff. And how I think the thing that I'm excited about is, as it's not hard to imagine how bots start to interface with the notification layer, and how bots help create a more intelligent, interactive experience around notifications, and something that we start to think of notifications as ways that we don't just one-directionally push this information and then we sort of get pulled back into an experience, but actually can say, not now, later, or customize, or be able to intelligently anticipate what we need, and then for us to be able to tell them back what we want, or what we desire, or what we need. So I hope everyone can stick around. I'm really excited for this, so I just wanted to give a quick introduction. Thanks.
Perfect. Who wants to go first? Me?
You have notes. Yeah.
Let's start there. Actually, you should start there because you had a couple of great posts about this. I was going to mention it, but because you built it, I think you should go.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so shoot, where to begin? I mean, I think it's interesting to think about like bots as a very old thing. I mean, one of the things that I sort of semi-obsessed with is the fact that, like, you know, the Turing test, which was, you know, something that came out in the 50s before computers and the internet, that was actually sort of roughly speaking about talking to a bot, or like presaging the idea of like somebody on the other side of the computer is or is not as a person. So it's definitely not a new thing. We were just talking about, you know, the history of IRC bots and things like that, which were in the domain of you know, sysadmins and you know, infrastructure people, but now things like Slack have brought this capability, and you know, the ubiquity of messaging apps obviously have brought this to a much more mainstream audience. So I think that that's why people are more interested in it right now, and that there's a lot of energy in that.
I haven't built a bot in a little while, but for a long time my fascination was actually bringing Alice, which is, you know, speaking of Turing tests and stuff like that. This kind of AI bot that I was trying to bring to different platforms that I used over the years. We built a IRC bot with Alice in the background. It was a weird echo. In 2008, I actually built one of the...
John may not realize that.
So John is talking. I thought that was me. John. I thought that was a weird echo with me.
It was just the voice in your head.
Yeah, got it.
Sorry.
And I actually experimented with Alice again on Twitter for the second time, where I built this bot on Twitter back in 2008 called Rachel6 that no longer runs, but the feed is still up there, where you could just interact with it and, you know, have a fun kind of conversation with it. More recently, because of Slack, and Slack is pretty much like half our workday, just us living in there. We've experimented with different bots, PM bot, which is a thing you were talking about and that you built, as well as a few other kind of tests that we do. We actually built some of the MVPs that we're working on inside Slack just to test it out, just to get a response, because it already has, you know, this mini built-in social network for some of the things that we're experimenting with. So that's been cool. That's basically my bot experience.
Yeah, I mean, I run platform at Slack, and so I get the opportunity to see a lot of bots before the rest of the world gets to see them. And so, I'm not saying this just as a carrot to try to entice people to work harder on better bots, but I don't think I've seen my favorite bot yet. I think that we're only getting started. I really liked Howdy today. That was my first time to see the latest demo of that. But I would say that their bots, they can be a standalone app. They can sit within Slack. They can provide a full-fledged service and be the only interface into a service. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there. But I also think that I do increasingly really think of bots as a feature. I think bots are a feature of an experience you can have, at least on my platform on Slack. That is, it's this virtual team member that sits there that you can have a conversational experience with that can do things for you, that can help make you and your team more productive. And so I think that for me, I'm waiting to see not just standalone bot experiences, but actually seeing a lot of the tools that people already use at work build a bot feature into what they do in Slack. And so, why shouldn't I be able to interact with my expense reporting software, in the same way I can interact with a human? Why shouldn't I be able to, effectively approve or give feedback to, a product spec or, a comp for a new UI, and be able to do that with an app in the same way that I would a human? So I think that, I do think of bots as features. I think they're really exciting features. I think they're hard to get right, and I think that there are a lot of smart people working on them, and I think that Slack's a great place for those things to exist, because it's not just a great communication experience that we're constantly working to make better, but it's also a team experience where it's not just about a single person interacting with that bot, but for a team to be able to interact with it and have the benefit of that visibility into the conversation, into what happened with that service. And so that's where I think there's a lot more to come than what we've seen so far.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, one of the things I find really interesting is, traditional bots have are relatively simple things where you say, like, issue command and it goes off and hits an API. But what we're doing with Howdy and hope to continue to do is that the bot is actually going to do the things, or it's actually going to wholly perform the task for you, within the messaging environment. Maybe that involves going out sometimes to do with an API call, but I think there's a lot of things that people do that bots can do instead. One of our sort of marketing pitches, you guys heard it before, is like, they don't get tired, they don't get distracted. Like our PM bot, which does these like check-in meetings, can run check-ins for 500 teams at the same time and not have their capacity diminished to do a good job. I think there's all sorts of stuff, and it starts getting creepy when I say this stuff, because it sounds like I want to fire all my human employees and replace them with robots, which I don't really want to do. But I think that we can give people back the time that they're spending doing like mundane menial tasks, and just have the bot do it. Just delegate it to the bot and have it automatically happen. One other thing we're really excited about, and I think we're supposed to kind of talk about the developer aspect of this, right? Is that there's not a great set of tools for doing this yet. When we set out to build a bot, when I run a bot developer community on Slack, and everybody who comes in says, like, well, which one of the 200 node modules should I use to start this? And most of them are like raw API clients to a messaging tool. They don't have the behavior of a bot built in. There's some fundamental things. There's this philosophical thesis or whatever called the Grice's maxim, which is about how conversations work. And it's actually relatively simple. There's 3 or 4 rules, and it's about like giving just the right amount of information, not misrepresenting yourself, things like that, right? So when we go down, or when we've built our things and are building our infrastructure, it really boils down to 2 or 3 basic things. Like the bot says things and the bot asks questions, and those are the fundamental building blocks of conversation. It's really not technically that complicated once you get past the like wire transfer of the data or the text.
Sure, but the understanding the meaning of users is something that is that's a high bar, and teams have been working on that for a really long time. I think what I'm seeing is that Slack is creating an opportunity to really put that technology to work. against work-oriented applications, sort of a bunch of different applications, but it also it sort of has that distribution opportunity, and that if you've got this great virtual assistant technology, you've built some NLP, but what do you use it for? And I think that there's a lot of great things that can be used for on Slack, and that's the part that I think it is hard. It will not be perfect right away, but I think that there enough teams are working on it that I actually think that some of these things that have been theoretical are actually going to become very practical in pretty short order.
I think distribution of bots, I think you've nailed something interesting there, because apps need two sides, right? Developers need to kind of spread the word. Users need to put it on their phone, but bots are just on the platform already. It's up to the user whether to use it or not. So distribution could actually be faster. Usage could be faster. To extend your point about how bots make life easier for users because they save time, I think the same is true on the developer side as well, bringing it back to the developer focus, because as I mentioned before, I think notifications, messaging, all of that is basically the lowest common denominator across any platform. A bot that I build in Slack, most of that code could be used anywhere else. And especially with things like watches becoming more popular, or Apple TV becoming more interactive, or wanting to give you responses, that makes a lot of sense, right? Slack on Apple TV totally is something that could happen in the future. And so that leads me to the second thing, which you almost touched on, but I actually was on another Slack about this stuff. There's a back channel for this conversation, where someone was asking, what is the SMTP of notifications look like? I think you mentioned what does the HTTP of this world looks like, because we don't have any common protocols or common standards that are very developer friendly beyond just a whole bunch of node modules just sitting around. And I think that's what's going to bring us from not that many interesting bots right now to the next 5 years where that could be very, very, very interesting.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the things that we're really interested in providing. Like a common, like I said, there's saying things, there's asking things. The network that you're asking the question on doesn't really matter. It could be a literal notification on your phone, or it could be a text message or whatever. So providing that common protocol, I think, is something that somebody should do, if not us.
Yeah. I guess the issue is right now that the two major platforms, Android and iPhone, came before the new kind of whatever notification protocol we're going to come up with. So it's always going to be split. I don't see a way to actually bring them together. What do you guys think about that?
Well,
whereas
SMS,
HTTP and all this stuff actually came before. Even SMS came before.
Yeah.
So where does that go, do you think? Just use SMS?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of people said it, but what other application comes pre-installed on every single phone, not even smartphones? Every single phone in the entire planet has SMS. So, that's what I would sort of fall back on as the sort of default protocol for this kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, obviously at Slack, looking at that, a lot of that really happening over HTTP, but I think at a different level of abstraction, I think that one of the things that's been interesting since I was at Twitter for many years, and but now being at Slack, mostly focused on work use cases. Hearing about and just thinking through the user experience around being overloaded by notifications, and I agree with Josh, your notifications start to feel like yet another inbox. And I think that we're focused on teams at work, but Slack does create a great, I think we have a really great model that solves for that, such that users have a lot of control around where they want to pipe those notifications. And so I know in my own experience and the way we use Slack at Slack is, we see a lot of notifications from a lot of third-party applications. Our engineers have a set of tools they use, our marketing team has a set of tools they use, but we're pretty, we're very thoughtful about how we organize that information within the company and within Slack, and that actually allows you to sort of cognitively decide what you need to pay attention to. And so when I, load my Slack in the morning, I've probably received hundreds, if not, thousands of notifications from a variety of different services I need for work overnight. But just because of the nature of how it works, you get to pipe those into channels and get to decide, do I need to care about this right now? And a lot of things I actually don't need to care about, but they're there. They're publicly available within the organization, and I can get back to them if I need them. So I get the benefit of access to those notifications without the interrupt-driven experience. And so, that's kind of tied to some of the stuff we talked about earlier today, but in its protocol, it's sort of a different different level, but sort of what's the structure of where notifications come, and also where do bots exist? And I think bots are going to exist in different parts of your sort of information architecture inside applications like Slack. And I think that bots will do different jobs based on the context there.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons maybe Slack is so popular is that we've moved from a world where Dropbox used to be the default across everybody because we were in a world of files to now we're moving away from files overall. So I think that's one of the kind of trends here. But the second thing is that unlike email with notifications, you can determine which you actually get access to, which actually buzzes your phone, which actually lights up the screen. It's very granular. Whereas email, it's either it's in your inbox and it pings you, or it doesn't. That's it.
Yeah, yeah. One of the, one of the things I get asked a lot about, are we an AI or whatever, right? Like, and my answer is basically not really, not in the sense that like we're trying to, achieve general AI where like you can say anything to it and it responds, but the kind of thing that is AI is like an emotional intelligence that we're trying to build in that is like, if you're going to deal with this bot and it's going to be doing things for you and it's going to try to behave like a better version of a person almost, it really has to know how people want to receive these things, like what's too much, what's not enough, so we're keying off of things like the presence change notification that Slack will send, so that if somebody has requested information from you and you were too busy and then you went offline and then 5 hours later you came back online, the bot's just patiently waiting there and says, hey, are you ready to talk now? And you can say yes or you can say later. And it's just like patient and ready to do it whenever you want. And not reminding you too often, things like that. So I think that's not like, again, it's not general AI, but it's it's an artificial intelligence of sorts that like helps to make these things useful and contextually valuable and not annoying or overbearing.
Yeah, and so, while I think certainly the mobile and the OS platforms likely have a role to play that we've all talked about today around sort of summarization and doing a better job sort of putting the right information in front of people across apps, within just the Slack ecosystem, my goal is to make it so that developers like Ben can really tune their experience to be if it's needs to be real time, make it be real time. If you've got a product manager that's making a million changes to the roadmap and it's just pushing notifications to the team over and over again, that's probably not good. So can that application developer instead be smarter and sort of pause and sum those up and send those in a batch mode because they know the context of users. But I do think that we have the benefit of really being able to optimize around efficiency, and also the developers on Slack get to focus on solving efficiency problems for users rather than attention problems. And so, it's just been really interesting to hear so much about the consumer use case because it is sort of a funnel problem on consumer. It's like push as many notifications as possible that up to the point that people uninstall the app or turn off the notifications, and then 40% of those something will happen, and then they eventually go down to someone clicking on an ad or actually purchasing something. And I think in a work-oriented enterprise ecosystem of experiences, you do get to, it's very symbiotic around sort of actually solving problems for users that in a way that hopefully is as efficient as possible, which doesn't always mean sort of more volume, more real time. It can be a lot of different things. So I think there's room for summarization, even within Slack. But I think our developers are going to be motivated to do the best job they can on their own as well.
I'm surprised we actually don't see more of that stuff. Summarization of notifications, waiting until it's sent. If you don't come back to an app for a day, queuing it all up, or actually just something so simple as just removing a notification.
Yeah,
I'm not seeing a lot of apps do that.
Whoever
you
had that idea, start a startup doing that.
Yeah. Oftentimes you see a notification that just doesn't mean anything or matter.
Right.
After you
too
leave
late,
home
yeah.
or something like that, but it's still kind of like queued up in your 5 or 10.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you the number of times I actually go through and clear all the notifications as opposed to reading them.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't matter. I passed the time already, right?
Yeah. So you were talking about efficiency, and from a developer's perspective, this is a really interesting thing to me, and sort of a distinguishing characteristic of building bots and notifications versus other kind of software. So for the last 10, 15 years, I've been building web apps and native apps and whatnot. The last couple of years, I've spent all this time building like really fancy editorial design tools for like big media companies, right? Like elaborate, scrolly telling news stories. And now that we've started building these bots, it all just seems like completely wasted effort and like priorities put in the wrong place, right? The thing about building these bots is that you have even less to work with than a tweet, right? Like you have in many cases pure text. You have a pretty hard character limit, and you don't have a menu. You don't have a navigational system. You're forced as a designer, as a software developer, to distill the thing that you're trying to do down into a very, very small space, a very succinct message with a very narrow number of choices. And you still have to tell the user what those choices what choices they have. So I think that's a really, really interesting and valuable design constraint that I think will sort of echo back across the world of apps and the web, because you build a native app and then 6 months later Apple decides that it should look different, and then you have to spend another $100,000 rebuilding your app's UI. Whereas this, I can change what my bot says every day without launching a software update, because the entire corpus of text that our bots say, which is hundreds and maybe thousands of different messages and scenarios, they're all just in a JSON file. So they're human editable, and I can just pop in and manipulate them.
And they're the same across every platform. That's the other thing, pretty much.
Say that again.
They're the same across every platform, pretty much, because it's text. It's so limited.
Exactly. Yeah. So, just super, super useful constraint to, and I think about like the content delivery scenario, or whatever. I'm a large grocery store. I want to provide a texting-based app. Like, well, how do I distill like what Whole Foods is down into 1 or 2 text messages? So I think it'll be a really, really useful exercise for people.
In the context of that, and going back to how like the payload is now bigger on Apple, I'm sure it's not the first thing they're thinking about, but I wonder if that is a way to kind of make iPhone notifications look different or differently programmable than Android. Do you know what I mean? To further create kind of a uniqueness to their platform, because that's important to them, as opposed to just I can send one message and it looks the same everywhere. They kind of want to stand alone a little bit, right? So interesting.
Yeah, probably so.
Yeah. Sure.
Guys up at MIT, Patty Mays and the team up there, they were doing a bunch of sort of early thinking about bots and push. It's taken us a long time to get to where we are today. Why is it switching on now? And what can we learn from what didn't work before?
I mean, I think for us, we look at things like Slack, and then, Kik has 200 million people using it, and like, who's even heard of Kik? Half the time it's like for teens. So the audience that can partake of the bot experience is much larger now, and I think that's one thing. And I think that the other thing is just the sort of combination of the narrative of like the looming, presence of AI and automation in the workplace. These are sort of all components of what make a good bot. So I think there's like Web 2.0, there's kind of a maturing of technologies and combining of those technologies that make it much more appealing and interesting again.
So it's bot 2.0.
Maybe we're in bot 2.0.
Messaging 2.0.
Two actually interesting concepts that we talked about before we sat down here is, and I think part of the reason bots and even notifications / messages are interesting right now are that one is that we have more and more devices that are all around us, smart devices, beacons, Echo, all of this stuff in our homes, in our environments. We walk around, 100 different things on our walk to work, and notifications are the only way they can really communicate with us for the most part, because they don't have an interface. That is their interface. There's just no other way for them to push you anything at all, or for you to respond back to them. So I think that's one thing. We didn't used to have that the first go around, and I think that's, as you can see over the last couple of years, that's a very, very, very interesting thing. And the second thing is, and this is something I've been wanting to write about, but I haven't quite gotten my head around it, And I think part of the reason notifications / messaging is interesting is because, to me, it's the right in-between layer between the world that we were in, which is the pull web, we constantly want to ask someone, and the push web, which we're going to go to in the future, where AI just knows everything about you, and it's able to push you all sorts of amazing information, as we talked about in previous panels. But messaging is interesting right now because it's the only interface where you can both push and pull. You can both ask and have something pushed to you that all looks the same to you. But from a second perspective, I think it's also interesting because right now we're in the in-between layer because there's a certain softness there. And the softness is that it's not full AI, it's human-assisted. It's a human-assisted machine, or if you want to look at it another way, it's like a machine-assisted human. So, when you're shopping for something or when you're asking for the weather, maybe 2 out of 3 times a human answers it. The rest of the time, maybe a machine's going to take over, or vice versa. And I think that's why it's interesting. It's the intersection of all these machines that are constantly around us, all these devices, and we're getting closer and closer to AI. What is it, another 40 years, right? I think that's another reason why.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are probably a lot of reasons for it, but one reason that comes to mind for me is that I feel like right now bots are starting to solve problems that people didn't know to ask to have solved in that way. Nobody asked somebody like, is it possible for my PM stand-up to be run without anybody actually having to spend time doing it? Nobody explicitly asked like, can I figure out how to get cupcakes here, for my team, and can I do that from a text message the same way I would text message a person? I'm sure, obviously people have had these ideas, but I think back to the first time I interacted with bots, it was oftentimes in a scenario when I really wanted a human. Like customer service, for example, you would have a chat experience or an email experience or an IVR on a phone, and all you really wanted to talk to a person in that moment. And so, bots are poor substitutes for when you're really looking for a person to help you on the other end. But instead, when they're actually helping a team be more efficient and they're solving problems, more quickly than any human could anyway, then I think it gets more interesting, and I think there's a lot more openness to it. And I think also just the products are better that people are building now, and they're starting to seem like something that an average user would find value in.
I love that point. Like nobody would expect or look for this thing. Like one of the first bots that we built and it kind of got us all started was this lunch bot, which I live in South Austin. There's like literally 45 great places to eat a taco on the street that I live on, and we would spend like half an hour every day like, well, where we're gonna go get a taco, and so we just made it so that the bot hears the word lunch and suggests a place to go eat lunch. Boom, done. Like, okay, we'll just go there. I think nobody was gonna go look for an app to do that, but here it is.
In a weird way, like, I guess you freak out if you're Elon Musk and he's like very much against going after AI the wrong way. But bots are the way we teach the system, because that's the simplest way we can teach a system. Computer vision is really hard, or it's getting easier and easier, but it's much harder than just sending a text in any language and having it learn something.
Right.
There's no better way to teach a system than this, and we're actually teaching the machine right now. Yeah, and I mean, I think text is just a great mechanism for providing services, anyways, right? Like everybody can read by the time they have a phone,
easily
and can write, and you can store it, transmit it, translate it. It's very versatile in a way that buttons aren't.
Dennis?
2 real quick. The first one's super quick. Is Siri a bot?
Yeah,
Yeah?
I think so.
We all agree. I was wondering what the line
I thought it
is
was a
between...
person. It was
What?
I thought it was a person.
Well, yeah, it depends who you ask. I wasn't sure where the line is between bot and AI and something like Siri. Is it all the same stuff?
I mean, I don't think it is. That's kind of to my point earlier. I feel like to me, when people talk about bots, they're really talking about a conversational UI with something that is not a human on the other end. So, but the actual, there's a layer there around understanding meaning in terms of how you actually deliver that interface in a way that is good and solves problems that I think goes way further into AI and a lot of other categories. You can build a dumb bot.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
I think a bot is anything that has anywhere from 1% machine code behind it to 100% machine code. Doesn't really matter.
So we have different.
Because as long as
I
there's
think the
code,
truth is there are a million different definitions for bots, which is part of what I'm seeing, and when people talk about them.
Yeah, I think when we're talking about is chat bots, which Siri is a little bit less of that, but I think there's a 75% overlap with the kind of interactions.
The second thing was we're messing with some of this in Foursquare, and I need 2 NLP pros on it. And like they're hard to find. It's expensive. Like every company that's going to go make one of these needs an NLP person. That's crazy. Like who's going to do the layer that handles the NLP so that all of us in this room don't have to hire those people? Is there something like that?
Yeah, Facebook just bought
Wit.
And so it's over. We should just.
No, there's gonna be another one, but like we have over 10,000 developers using Wit.ai and constantly updating it on a daily basis. So that's going to be the strongest system to use.
Kevin Kelly said a long time ago that eventually we're just going to be paying for AI as a service. I feel like Amazon Web Services is going to add it as a service, and you're just going to go, NLP.aws and just get access to it, and you pay for it on a fractional basis.
I agree, and I think Google will compete in that space as well. I think time
Once
will
Google
tell
builds
whether or
it
not
internally,
Apple
they're
would
just
ever
going to
open
make
that
it available as an API.
But I would reject the assertion that like to build a bot you need to have an NLP at all. Like one of the most was like canonical documents about building conversational UIs from the You Don't Know Jack DVD game called the Jack Principles, and I just reread it the other day. It's amazingly on point still, and they were talking about pre-recorded videos being played in a weird sequence, and so that had no natural language processing or processing of language in any way, but it was still very convincing and real to the users. So we're not doing any NLP in our thing. We just sort of say yes or no. And you make it so that it would be weird if somebody didn't say yes or no.
It doesn't have to be smart on learning. I just feel like I was reading this thing in the New York Times, I think it was last weekend in the magazine, about the new Barbie that's going to be an AI Barbie that you can talk to. And so really it depends who the audience is, right? What is a bot, what is not? To us, it could be a different definition, but to an older audience that doesn't know computers or children, anything that talks and knows 10 sentences is a bot, is smart, is a robot.
Yeah. One thing, I just like to quote this thing, but this guy, Matt Webb, formerly of this company called Berg, whatever, had this great phrase, which was, be as smart as a puppy, right? Not as smart as Einstein, be as smart as a puppy. Like, it's enthusiastic, it wants to help you, but if it does the wrong thing, you just say, go away, and it does. And like that's kind of what our guiding principle is. Like we're not trying to be a real person or a complete AI. We just want to be like a friendly, helpful puppy who wants to help, but will like just shut up if you tell it. So
just one quick question for you, April. How much communication on Slack happens between person to person, person to many people, and bot to people?
Person to person, person to bot, and bot to bot, person to many people. The majority of communication happens in channels, so that would be people to many people. So that's the majority of the communication, and that scales. It scales a little faster than our user growth. I mean, as teams are, as they're using Slack, their behaviors are changing. They are, becoming communicative in ways there that they might not have on other platforms like email. And that grows. But what we're seeing is, we're still seeing, we're in a really early stage of growth of the apps on our platform, and I expect to see that the rate of communication between people and applications, and so that's not necessarily just bots, but just messages coming in from third-party applications, as well as interaction with bots. I expect to see that scale more fast than people-to-people communication. Both because it's emergent, but also because I think there are going to be a lot of apps that solve problems, both the known problems and then also the unknown unknowns.
Yeah. So.
What's that? Yeah, I don't know any stats, but anecdotally they do. Yeah.
So we talked a lot about like the conversational UI is like maybe the best interface for mobile or what have you, and certainly like you see these start to proliferate everywhere or standalone products that do the same thing. But you wonder, each of them has its own challenges around again summarization or notifications or actual like NLP or intelligence behind it. Again, so kind of echoing some of what Dennis said, like is this something that's going to be a part of every app that they're going to have to figure out themselves, and for each of those three things, or will there be like a common platform to build bots, right?
yeah, there's going to be a common platform. But I mean, there already are. There's a thing called Superscript, which is a JavaScript library that does, conversational UI and intelligence. There's a XML schema for defining, AI behaviors called AIML. There's Node Natural, which is like a natural language processing node module. So there's a lot of stuff already available. I think bringing it to scale is going to be an interesting problem. Yeah, I think a lot of these things are going to get abstracted away into API layers and platforms.
Actually, I have sort of a related question, which is, I think we mentioned earlier today, it might have even been me actually, that most people.
The royal we.
Some
It's been a long
really,
day.
really smart guy said.
Just full disclosure, that most people use just a handful of apps, right? Like maybe 4, 6 apps, at least regularly. Do you think that we will see a similar pattern when it comes to bots, where most people will have just a handful of bots that they use, or do you think it'll be maybe something where people end up interacting with dozens of different bots that are dedicated to specific functions? Like maybe you'll have a bot just for ordering from Instacart, and then you'll have a bot that you interact with for work-related task management or something like that, or does it all be subsumed into one sort of Uber bot that then delegates those tasks out, like subcontracts out tasks to other bots? I mean, I guess it's not necessarily mutually exclusive, but I think if we look at apps, and consumers at least tend to want to only have a handful of things that they use, and I wonder whether it's going to end up that they're going to want to have like a limited number of bots that they're going to want to engage with as well.
I definitely think so. I think it's probably going to depend on context, right? At home, first of all, I'm very excited to see Siri come out on Apple TV, but at home, I feel like Alexa is a runaway winner, not only because it can cover a lot of things in your home and it interfaces with smart things and stuff, but by the way, it also is the thing that you talk to that brings things into your home. And Apple just can't do that anytime soon. So you probably have one at home. That's probably something like an Alexa. You might have something at work. Maybe it's some combination of something in Slack and something that's actually in the workplace. And then maybe one in the car you're moving around. And maybe that's Siri because that's on your phone. And you're totally right. I don't see a world where the average person uses more than 4 or 5 things. I think betaworks actually had this thing, the home screen study. I don't know how many active apps came out of it, but I think most people had like 21 apps, which is perfectly the number of apps that fit on a home screen without actually swiping over. So in a world where the average person only has 20 max that they've ever downloaded, 3 or 4 bots kind of makes total sense.
I mean, on the other hand, there's a discoverability problem if a bot does too many things, right? Like, how do you know that it can both order an Uber car and like tell you the weather? So I tend to think that it'll be more diverse. Like you'll have more bots than fewer, but maybe one bot that sort of tells you to talk to that guy over there. Talk to him.
So we're gonna, April, guys, we're gonna keep going for another 5 minutes, and then we'll wrap completely. We're cutting the last panel because it was kind of a wrap up. If that's okay, because I think all of us we've run long on this, but people are enjoying this. So let's keep going for another 5 minutes on bots.
You mentioned the Barbie example. Have you seen any examples of generationally targeted bots besides Barbie? I'm thinking in particular about the elderly in terms of elder care. Maybe a good Medicare bot would be a great thing to have at this point as a difficulty. Any examples of those that you're seeing?
There's some interesting stuff in robotics for like elder care, but
I'm thinking more in that kind of conversational.
There's a startup in Brooklyn. I don't know. I think it starts with a J. It's a camera. It's a screen that moves around. Anyone know this thing? JP starts with something like this. But Jibu. Yeah, I think yeah. There's a great example of it. You can interact with it. It actually watches faces and it follows faces. And so the idea there is like you can talk to your grandparents and they won't have to go fiddle around with things. They can just watch their grandchildren. And because it follows faces, you can move around the kitchen and the screen just follows where you are. I think that's interesting. Everybody at work makes fun of me for having an Alexa. They're always like, oh, you probably go home and have a whiskey and talk to your Alexa. And my retort to them is that most people that grew up with computers, we interact, we touch, we tap, we do all these things. But as we get older, we're not going to be able to do that. I think these font sizes are going to be too small when we're really old. We're not going to be able to or even have the patience to do any of those things. So we're going to talk to our computers naturally. I think that's why I'm so bullish and so excited about things like Alexa, Echo, / Siri in the home, because that's how older people are going to be interfacing with things. That is going to be their interface.
On the other side, like, I mentioned Kik earlier, they have some stat that's like 18 million people have opted into talking to bots on their platform, and they're like 13 to 15-year-olds or something like that. So there's a sort of natural, adoption of of this kind of technology by the younger people that in a way that we haven't. So I think my kid already talks to Alexa like it's, a person. She doesn't, she's 3 years old. It's completely natural to her. So I think that, the younger kids are going to come to it very naturally.
My grandsons love it. They won't leave it alone. And they love to try to tease it and trick it and, all the things they would do.
Yeah, we all like to joke around about how the floppy disk for the save icon doesn't make any sense because kids don't understand what that is. But what we don't realize is that a whole generation of children are growing up where they are talking to their computers. So that's why kids and the elderly are very, very interesting. And a lot of the things we build are really not for us, it's for them.
If you have an Alexa, go home and say, like, what is 100 million billion trillion zillion times 1 billion 100 million zillion or whatever? It's hilarious. Like, this is my favorite thing to do. Like, just confuse Alexa with large numbers. Amazing.
That's actually something we never mentioned, is like bots never get tired. They don't grow old, they never get tired. They're not like, in the context of customer service, you can ask the same thing 1,000 times and you can get mad at them, but they're always gonna, maintain their composure. They're never gonna get confused.
So I had a question sort of about feelings and relationships with bots, particularly around programmability. Like, it seems to me that a bot that you can program, or a bot that sort of learns as you teach it tricks, to go back to the puppy analogy, like, it seems like there's a completely different relationship with that kind of bot versus a bot that's like ready-made. Hey, I'm X bot for this service, here to help. I'm just curious if you guys kind of have thoughts about that and how you approach it. It seems to me that, for instance, like being able to program a bot, even if it comes out of the box with some functionality, with a little bit, I would imagine that would result in like way deeper, prolonged engagement with the AI itself.
Yeah, I mean, what I always sort of refer to about this is R2D2. Sorry, I'm such a nerd, but like R2D2, like there's a million R2 bots, right? And they come off the shelf and they like pilot your X-Wing or whatever. But what made R2D2 special was that they didn't wipe his memory. Like, he had this accumulated, experience of like living through, 6 movies or whatever. So, yeah, I totally agree. And I think that Slack has that built in, and I think to some degree that's why people are so stoked about Slack bots in general. Is like, you can have Slack hear, a keyword and say something back, and it's really funny, and it makes that Slack bot your Slack bot. And I think that we hope that our bots will be the conveyor of company culture within Slack, right? Like, it learns all about the funny jokes that your team makes and the information that needs to be provided in Win, and it's very uniquely yours, even if it started as a sort of generic entity.
Yeah, I mean, I think within and kind of to the question about how many bots is a typical person going to use. While the number may be relatively small, particularly if bots keep getting better and they get smarter the longer you work with them, the more that the experience between, in the way, we think about it in Slack teams is going to be so different from one team to the next. So, like, it's the same thing as if I pick up somebody else's phone here. They probably have the same, 5 most popular apps or whatever that I have on my phone, but it's not my phone, and they are missing some things that I use. And it's this, sense that your experience on these operating systems, on these platforms, is very customized to the set of applications that you've curated, but then those applications are also getting smarter, and so it feeds on itself. And so I do think that I think there's no question that there's a lot of potential for these things to get smarter over time, and hopefully they can actually get smarter by interacting with each other. Like, I don't think that that's unreasonable to imagine that one team's got these 4 bots that are sitting inside of a channel, sitting inside the team, and they are able to feed off of each other and actually accelerate the rate at which they can get better for the team amongst themselves. And then those 3 bots could be sitting in a different team and sort of be learning a completely different set of patterns and language and behavior. So I mean, I think I mean, this is a learning thing where I think that there's a curve that we're at a pretty early stage on.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we think about right now, like, so you're going to turn on a Howdy bot in your Slack, you name it. First step is like, what do you want to call this thing? So what else? What other apps do you do that with? Like, hey, this is Bob. And then, we kind of joke about this, and I don't want to sound sinister here, but like after the 30-day free trial of our bot is over, like you're going to let Bob just blink out of existence there? Like that's pretty messed up, So I think, I don't know. I think there's like dangerous but very interesting opportunities in there because people will see it as an entity of some sort and not just an app or database somewhere.
I still keep coming back to very few bot platforms. And the reason for that is at scale, and if you really have a lot of knowledge in the back end, it's so closely tied to the OS and the cloud. And there are only 3 players right now that have that: Apple, Google, and Amazon, which is why I listed Alexa, Siri, and then whatever thing is at work, which could be Google. And it is increasingly Google with Google for Work, Google Apps. But then what that means is that at the second layer, maybe they will write SDKs and things like that so that we may see a whole new interface of apps sitting on top of that, which each have their own interface and their own unique voice and all these other things. But I think it still comes down to those 3 major players. Because the more you tell a bot, even though one is Bob and one is hilarious and one is sad, you have Bob and Jack or whatever, that needs to live somewhere. And like, to my mind, that can only live in 3 places right now.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, you and me need to talk about like changing the way that the bot user interface works on Slack, because right now it's WebSockets, which is a completely different technology than like RESTful APIs, and it's much more elaborate to sort of do at scale. So
yeah, maybe there's actually a 4th platform that's like Slack and a whole bunch of other open source. The open source community comes around on the 4th platform, just as Android came around in the early 2000s, where it was like, we don't want to stay on these incumbent platforms. Let's kind of share the resources and build half open source, half kind of a consortium of these things. So maybe 4.
Yeah.
Matt?
As we anthropomorphalize, or whatever the word is, the different bot platforms, it's notable that all the major sort of AI-driven ones, Siri, Cortana, Alexa, I'm missing one. Well, they all have both either female voices by default or female names. And I'm curious y'all's thoughts about the implications of that, both as we personalize and depersonalize our interactions.
I was just reading this thing this morning about how until the 70s, I think, hurricanes had female names traditionally. And of course, ships for a long, long time, it's the same thing. More recently, I came across this game that's a purely bot-style game. It's called Lifeline. You start the game, and you get a text, and you text back and forth with this person. The whole game is a conversational UI. And the first text, or the second text, or the third text from this person says, "What's your name?" And you give it your name. I think you give it your name. And then the person responds with the name. And the name is Taylor. I thought it was a female. Some people thought it was a male. Do you know? So I feel like maybe it's left up to the interpretation of who's actually on the other side. And maybe that's the way we'll end up building it. But right now, maybe it is all female right now. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe it's because just as tradition. It's like, maybe some people just think like, oh, ships were like this and all these other things. Maybe we just start there.
Yeah, institutional sexism, that assistants have always been women or whatever. But I don't know. My wife and I, who's my co-founder, always have an argument because I will refer to the bot as he, and she's like, hello. So now we say like, robot is a gender.
Yeah, I thought what was interesting in Lifeline is like everybody thought it was a male because like, oh, he's stuck on Mars. He's an astronaut. And I was like, no, it's a girl. Taylor. Taylor could be guy or girl. And I thought that was genius, the way they named that.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely, it is not gonna noticed by me, but I have noticed that some of the services early on, the default may be female, but then you have the option to change it. So I suspect that it will be left up to user choice, and I think the approach where you get to actually help shape the identity for your bot, I think is what makes the most sense, and so I think that will, I have a feeling that'll probably become the norm. But there's some more male bots coming out that I know are in development, so don't worry. You guys will get your shot.
I feel like, I mean, it's a brilliant feature, and I mean, it's just a great hook, but the actual utility maybe remains to be seen. But it's also kind of interesting because you're talking, Naveen, you were describing bots as like the simplest possible interaction. So there's read and there's write, and it's read text, write text. And so this is adding an extra complication there of writing back an attachment to text that was previously read to you. So I don't know, from a developer perspective, where you see that April developing, and it also is maybe the first potentially proprietary feature of like that, where you couldn't apply the same feature set to a Slack bot that you would to another platform?
Yeah, I mean, I think it remains to be seen. But it does. I think it presents a little bit of a hurdle for developers, but it's definitely possible to make use of that. I think that I do agree that reactions have a lot of utility. Some of the ways that we use them is someone will choose different emojis for a poll. So which day do we want to have the meeting, and people have fun with it. Pig, cat or dog or something like that, and people use that and they respond with that. We use them for voting also with the plus. So and that's just scratching the surface. I mean, there are also emoji letters, so there are other ways to sort of use this. So I think there's a lot more utility to it. What I hear when I talk to customers is I think that they're really getting into the swing of starting to use those. And so I think as more of our customers are using them, then I think that obviously the incentives for developers to figure out smart things to do with it will go up. So feature's only been out for 6 to 8 weeks or something like that. So I think we'll see where it goes, and we'll see if it becomes a broad spread thing that other services also emulate. And if so, then I think there will be a conversation about how we make it so that developers can sort of work across those platforms. But right now, it is specific to Slack.
Emoji is also a little bit more universal, and one app that we started using a lot, Telegram, can actually respond right from the notification store with a thumbs up. That seems like the lightest, easiest way. You don't even have to go into the app. You don't have to say a rude yes or a good or okay, which just could be yes or could be no. I thought, again, to go back to the lightweight, that's as lightweight as you can get.
One of the things I like about emoji reactions is, forgive me for this, but does anybody remember suck.com? Which was like a hot wired zine from the early aughts. Their whole thing was like adding subtext to the content of their article through the links. Right, so you wouldn't know really what they were saying until you click the link. So I think that emoji reactions kind of do that too, where I don't have to say the thing, I just silently add a little flame icon or whatever, and everybody gets that there's additional meaning to that message.
Okay,
so.
Ben.
Beer.
There you go. Okay, I think we're going to wind down now. This has been awesome. I don't know, Steve, if you have any closing words. It's been a long day. This was great. Thank you for running longer, guys. It was much better than us doing a wrap. Steve and I were going to wrap up, and at least speaking for myself, I just feel like just letting it finish here is the best thing. And so this has been great. Thank you very much, and thank you for participating. And we have, actually, let me first also thank all the team who put this together, because there's a whole set of awesome people behind the scenes and in front of the scenes who've made this happen. So thank you to all of them. And we have drinks in the back, and there is beer, there's soft drinks, and there's also some wine, and there's also some cocktails if people want them. And thank you very much.